Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. Today's episode is presented by Golf Dojo. Your space, your time, your game. Bring your game to Golf Dojo, Western New York's best indoor golf experience. Visit mygolfdojo.com. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for locking in today, whether you're listening, watching, following, subscribing. I do appreciate y'all very much. I am joined right now by my friend, recurring guest, Anthony Marino. Anthony was it traveling work? I don't remember why, but no Anthony on the show last week. And it's funny because in some ways it kind of feels like yesterday where you started being an every week person on the show, every week guest on the show. And now fast forward like a full year later and you miss a week, and I feel a little bit lost.
I know,
man.
And I miss our conversations, right? Like you take a week off. I mean, at least if I'm gonna miss a week this time of year, right? It's that what they call peak off season. So it's okay. We're not missing anything critical that's taking place with the team. Like no news is good news in my opinion. So but I did miss you, buddy.
You know what it is? That's accurate. No news is good news when it's June and July before training camp. For sure. Yeah, look, not just this show, but especially this show, I should say, because trying to put together 5 of these every week, but pretty much any show right now. When you get to that May, June, July, it can be tough to come up with some content to keep people engaged. But I think we've done a pretty good job of it, and going to continue that today because we're now within just a couple weeks of training camp. And obviously this is a Bills podcast, and we'll always spend a little more time about the Bills and other teams. But I'm going to take a look around the AFC today because, this has been an offseason with the Buffalo Bills with a lot of question marks, a lot of turnover, a lot of moves. There's going to be a lot of questions going into the season, and we'll hit on a few of those today as well. But I don't think the Bills are unique to the rest of the conference. There's question marks about all these teams around the league. Before we dive in, and like I said, we'll kind of go through every team. Some will just, glance through. The others we might spend a couple more minutes on. But does this feel like a season to you, Anthony, right now when it comes to the AFC, where there's like a clear-cut terror, a clear-cut favorite? Or does it feel like, despite Kansas City being back-to-back champions right now, that this is just a conference that's completely up for grabs?
Yeah, I think it feels up for grabs. I mean, right, when you look at all the teams that are out there, and it is interesting because even with some, and I know we'll talk about it, like some teams are being lauded for what they did, but it's like, hey, you're not looking at all the players that they lost too. And I think there's a lot of that shuffling which takes place. And Kansas City is a little bit of that gold standard because even 2 seasons ago, it's like, all right, you lose Tyreek Hill, you trade him away, you've got some young guys on your roster, and they still win the Super Bowl. So, I think as a Bills fan, that gives me a little bit of just like, okay, keep the emotions in check. Don't get too high or too low because someone is left. And I think we'll probably talk about that in a little bit, but everything does feel up for grabs, right? So I think it's okay to feel that way. It's going to make it a real exciting season in the AFC. And the Bills have a heck of a schedule where they play a lot of these contenders across the AFC. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
I agree with you. I mean, the conference obviously is up for grabs. I don't think Kansas City necessarily has a stranglehold on the conference. But to your point, this is a team that lost Tyreek Hill 2 years ago. They still win the Super Bowl. This is a team last year that for a lot of the regular season stunk on offense. Quite frankly, they were below average on offense, despite having the best player in the world, arguably, sort of arguably. And they still won the Super Bowl. So, and then they added to the wide receiver position this offseason. So they absolutely deserve to be the favorite. I don't think there's any disputing that. One thing I would say before we get into some of these teams, a lot of people have been critical of the Bills offseason, nationally mainly, of course. There's not a lot of teams in the AFC that really, on paper, look significantly or even notably better than they did last season. Maybe Houston, maybe actually Tennessee, and we'll kind of get to those teams. But yeah, I don't know. There's question marks about Kansas City, and there's just a lot of question marks around teams around this league right now, just generally speaking.
Well, and I think when we talk about question marks too, it's always that piece of like, how is your young talent going to develop? And right, I mean, it
Sure.
was a year ago. I mean, we joke about it because what the Bills were going to do at linebacker and Terrell Bernard and all this. Now all of a sudden, a year later, Terrell Bernard is one of your 10 most indispensable players, important for the success the team is going to have this year. So, right, I mean, you can say it about every team in the AFC, but what are those second-year players going to look like? Those third-year players, are they going to be on the field? Are they able to prove themselves? Can they take that next step? That's the part that makes it a lot of fun, because you'll start to see some of those guys pop, and hopefully more of those guys pop for the Bills than they do for the competitors.
You know what? You bring up an amazing point. That's completely right, because look, free agency is fun. It's a lot of fun to go get a couple big name players and give them money. And a lot of people will evaluate how a team is going to project based on who they signed in the offseason or maybe who they traded for in some cases. But to your point, whether it's Buffalo or any team in the NFL, your biggest success or failure comes down to the guys that you've drafted and you've developed, how good they look. Terrell Bernard last year, I would have been throwing fits. I don't even think we even discussed him as, at least not much, as being, a key part of this football team a year ago at this time. And you see what he did, and you see what Khalil Shakir is kind of verged on becoming. James Cook was fourth in the NFL in rushing last year. Just Spencer Brown was really good. Osiris Torres played every snap as a rookie. There's a lot of good young ascending talent. Christian Benford. I mean, I could keep going.
Sure.
On this team, and there's probably the same case for a lot of these teams around the league. But at the end of the day, the most important factor, bigger than maybe even any question mark that we're going to discuss today, is how the guys that you've developed, the young guys, are they ascending? Have they already peaked? Things like that. They're going to matter an awful lot. Let's just dive into it. And I'm kind of going randomly here by division. I'm just going to throw a team out. And the biggest question mark that, at least off the top of my head, I could think of, some of these teams might have 2, 3, or 4 big question marks. Denver, we'll start there. And again, we're going to hit every team here in the AFC today. I think the biggest question mark might be, is Sean Payton overrated? And you might completely disagree with me at this point. Like, how much of Sean Payton's success with New Orleans was predicated on Drew Brees being an elite quarterback at the time, like a smaller scale version of Bill Belichick or Tom Brady, who deserves more credit? Like I said, on a smaller scale. They also got a rookie quarterback now in Bo Nix. They traded Jerry Jeudy. So on paper, I don't really think this team is great. And I thought last year, Denver was a very disappointing team. And Russell Wilson was not good. We'll talk about him in a few minutes as well. But how much of that was on Russ Wilson? How much of that was on the head coach? What are your thoughts when it comes to Denver?
Yeah, so when I look at Denver and Sean Payton, I'm not ready to call him overrated yet. I can see why you're asking the question, and this is probably a year where it gets to that point. I mean, him taking over for Nathaniel Hackett and the train wreck that hiring was, right, where they thought, oh, we're going to get Hackett and then we're going to get Aaron Rodgers and we're going to be good. That doesn't take place. Obviously, the overpayment in trading for Russell Wilson and that 2-year experiment not working in any way, shape, or form, kind of basically giving him away to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with Peyton, it's a little bit like, okay, let's see what he can do now with a clean slate. So you get through that first year, you're kind of mopping things up. I mean, I don't love his personality. I think sometimes you see his antics and stuff on the sidelines, but just because
Sure.
it might not be my favorite choice for a coach, I'm not ready to call him overrated yet. But this year will be interesting, because now it's like, okay, you've kind of like cleared the deck a little bit. now you've got to show that you can, that you're worth the price that they paid.
Let me also say this too. Each and every year in the NFL, without fail, there is a team that when you're talking about them in May and June, they suck and they were terrible the season before. And without fail, there is a team that goes from worst to first in their division and becomes good in one season. The Cincinnati Bengals went from a joke to winning the AFC basically in one full year with Joe Burrow at quarterback. Houston went from having, I think, the second pick of the draft last 2 years ago, second and third pick of the draft, to being a team that won their division, won a playoff game, and is probably at this point heavily favored to win the AFC South. So each and every year, there are teams that, like this time of year, we would pretty much dismiss and end up being really, really good. The Chargers, could they be that team this year? I think their biggest question is, does Justin Herbert have enough? Does he have enough guys around him that are good that's going to get the most out of his talents? Justin Herbert is weird because skill set wise, I feel like he's right there with the top 3 to 5 quarterbacks in this league. The production has just not always been there. They lose Keenan Allen, they lose Mike Williams, they lose Austin Eckler, which you can argue all those guys might be past their prime anyway. But again, those are big time former producers. They lose Jared Everett. Now they got Lamar McConkey. They drafted the rookie Quentin Johnson, who was a first round pick last year. They didn't do too much. Gus Edwards is their feature running back. Just doesn't seem like he's got a lot of weapons. He got a new coach, of course, with Harbaugh. Well, what are you thinking right now with the Chargers question mark? It just doesn't feel to me like Justin Herbert's got an awful lot to be in the best position to succeed.
Yeah, it's a different kind of expectation. And obviously so many Bills fans talk about their worries of this becoming too balanced of an offense or a run first type of offense. Well, everything that you're talking about with the Chargers right now, you look to yourself and just say, okay, good gosh, with the hire at coordinator, and you bring in a Gus Edwards, I think bringing in a J.K. Dobbins, some of the stuff that they're doing as well, you're looking at it and saying, okay, is this going to become more of a run heavy team? And is Justin Herbert, is he just not that guy? And again, it's been a little bit up and down. I put him in a similar type of category to like a Trevor Lawrence, right? You see some stuff where it's like, my gosh, this guy looks like he can be all world. And then other days, like, hey, looks like he can be a good NFL quarterback, but maybe where you get into that, and I don't say purgatory in the same way that we used to mean it as Bills fans, but like, hey, this guy's going to get have a big contract and you're going to kind of be tied to him. And can he get you over the hump? The coaching change will be critical for him. I'm really curious to see what takes place there. But what they've done at wide receiver, to me, is a little bit of a head scratcher.
For sure. As you're talking, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, I wonder where you would slot him right now. Like if we were to take 32 NFL starting quarterbacks and slot them, where would Justin Herbert be? Hell, man, that might be a topic that that we hit on here before camp gets going in a couple weeks. Pretty fascinating because, again, he's got a really big time skill set, but it just hasn't translated consistently to success for him. Anyway, all right, so next team in that division is Vegas. And look, the question's got to be, can you win with Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell? I think it's going to be Gardner Minshew. And I'll say maybe one of the biggest surprises to me of the entire offseason league-wide, at least certainly conference-wise, was the Raiders were pretty aggressive and active in free agency. I mean, they gave a gazillion dollars to Christian Wilkins to get him to leave Miami to come there. And Gardner, and they had opportunities at the draft and they didn't take anybody. And Gardner Minshew right now feels like their guy. And they got some weapons. I mean, Devontae Adams is still one of the top receivers in this league. Jacoby Myers is good. They drafted Brock Bowers in the first round, a tight end. They had drafted Michael Mayer the year before that in the second round. So back-to-back years where they've used the top 2 pick on a tight end. Just seems to be, some good weapons on this team, but how serious are you about winning with Gardner Minshew is very likely your QB1 right now?
Yeah, and Gardner Minshew is someone I compare not based on his personality, but like on his play to someone like Tyrod Taylor, right? Of just like you're good enough that you can make the team good enough. And if you've got those other pieces around you, like you just rambled off a good number of them, like,
Mhm.
the Raiders should not be a team that you overlook next season, at least in my opinion, right? Like, I'm not saying that they're going to make the playoffs. I'm not saying they'll be above 500. I'm just saying it's one of those teams that with him, we've seen him do enough from his time in Jacksonville with his play with the Colts last year, even the brief stint with the Eagles. Like, he can do some things. But I was really surprised that, they didn't go after someone like a Justin Fields, like someone that had, let's just call it more of an upside, right? Because even as you add these other pieces, okay, hey, if Justin Fields hits, that can be great for you. Or if he doesn't, you probably have a top 5 pick and you can, draft somebody high next year. So I do find that they're probably now, to make reference with the Bills, right, in that quarterback purgatory of they're probably going to be good enough that they don't get to pick really high. I mean, we
Hmm.
like what Antonio Pierce did last year coming in as a head coach. I like the
Yeah.
vibe that he's brought, the culture that he brings. Like, there's not many head coaches that you look at in the NFL and say, I'm rooting for that guy. I'm rooting for that guy. But the way they handled the quarterback position, like, yeah, a little bit of a head scratcher.
Justin Fields was linked to the Raiders a lot
Yeah.
during trade season before he ends up going to Pittsburgh. Yeah, man. I mean, maybe even if you're trying to win now, you go try to sign Kirk Cousins or something. I don't know. Look, I love Christian Wilkins. I mean, he's a great player. As much as I hated him in Miami, the way he played and, that rivalry and some of the dirty shit he did out there, I am a big fan of his game, and he'll be a good addition for the Raiders. But how much is he really going to help that defense? I don't really think they were one player away from being a great defense regardless.
But let me say this. I mean, you talk
Mm.
about, is there a better fit for a quarterback than Gardner Minshew going to Las Vegas? I mean,
That's true.
just the personality, the flair that he kind of brings
Sure.
to things. I mean, it's just like good. At least it could make for some good storylines, and I think that'll be kind of interesting. So, not to get off the Christian Wilkins point, but
For what it's worth, yeah, I'm in where you have a media dynasty league, and I actually have Gardner Minshew on my roster. So he does turn out to be pretty good. I'm going to be pretty happy about that. I just wouldn't hold my breath. All right, the last team in this division, the AFC West, of course, is the Kansas City Chiefs. And look, there ain't a lot of questions with this football team. There's just not. But one of them, legit to me, is how much will losing Janarius Sneed come back to bite them? I mean, Josh Williams, Jalen Watson are their outside corners now. The Jerry Sneed was maybe one of the top 2 to 3 corners in the NFL. I mean, he was a legitimate, pure Trey White in his prime type, Trey White's all pro season caliber shutdown corner. And he got traded to the Titans because they just couldn't afford to pay him. Couple question marks for them, but to me, that's probably the biggest one.
yeah, it's probably the biggest one, right? And it goes back to what we talked about before when they traded away Tyreek Hill and really didn't replace him, right? I mean, it was,
Mhm.
you draft a Sky Moore, you sign a Marquez Valdez Scantling, like you weren't replacing someone at that level. And now kind of a similar type of scenario. So you think to yourself, like, gosh, okay, this should feel like a big hit, but I think we've kind of learned our lesson when it comes to the Chiefs that yeah, I'm not going to, kick dirt on the grave or anything along those lines until I have reason to, because this is the one franchise I think in so many ways, you talk about things and you say like, how much is it about the coaching staff or this and that versus the players? When it comes to the Chiefs, I do think it's about the coaching staff, right? Because you can argue Andy Reid is the best head coach in football and that offensive mind and what he brings to the table. And Steve Spagnuolo is arguably the best defensive coordinator and what they've been able to do with that team, with what they have built. And, it kind of goes to this piece, and this might be a topic for another point too. Like, everyone says, oh, Josh Allen's the second best player in the NFL. Like Patrick Mahomes is the best player. If Pat Mahomes was on the Bills and Josh Allen was on the Chiefs, I don't think like, oh, the Bills are winning those Super Bowls because, because they have Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs aren't going to win because they
Agreed.
have Josh Allen. Like, no, the Chiefs have like the best support system. They have the best defense. Their defensive coordinator does a phenomenal job in these big games. And you have the best head coach in football that's an offensive mastermind. So it's kind of, I know I'm kind of like, and that's not like a shot on Pat Mahomes. Like, he's phenomenal, but he's phenomenal in the system that is a
Sure.
phenomenal system to be a part of. So I say that of like, I don't have any questions about the Kansas City Chiefs and losing Snead. I mean, sure, it's a hit, but for them, until they're like done and over, I'm no,
I
I'm
get it.
sleeping with one eye open. I guess what I'm trying to
I totally get it. And I also mostly agree too with your assessment of Mahomes. Yeah, it's the coach, the weapons around him with arguably the greatest tight end who's ever played football, has been his primary consistent pass catcher throughout his career. Some elite defenders, not great defenses, but Chris Jones is one of the best in the league. Maybe Josh Allen has a couple Super Bowls to his credit if he was the Kansas City Chief, but you can't penalize Mahomes for being a Kansas City Chief either. When you look at the track record and the success, that's why you could say Josh Allen is as good as Mahomes skill-wise, and I absolutely believe that, but I just don't see a world where I can't put Mahomes number one based on the success he had. Don't it kind of feel like with the Chiefs, like it's going to be like track meet city? Like they lose their top corner. It's like, oh, whatever, we're not going to pay this guy. Then they go out and the receivers weren't good enough last year, except for Rashee Rice, who got in some offseason shit, but it seems like he's going to be all right. He's going to play, but you got him. Then you go and you sign Hollywood Brown, and then you trade up for Xavier Worthy. Just blazers out there. Just feels like they're ready to start getting into some track meets with teams, and maybe it'll be fun to watch. They were kind of boring last year, actually, to watch. Good. And if you're a Chiefs fan, got the results you wanted, but kind of boring. I don't think there's going to be a very boring offense based on who they've added this season.
No, completely agree. Completely agree.
I will say one other thing, too, before we go to a quick break here. With the Chiefs, kind of a bonus question mark I think might be fair is how much does Travis Kelce have left? He's up there. He did not have a great regular season last year. His numbers actually still looked fine, but he really didn't do much in the back end of the regular season. Then all of a sudden the playoffs come, turns that light switch on, and becomes Travis Kelce when it matters the most in the playoffs. But he's getting up there in age. He's with Taylor, which whatever, that may or may not matter. But I mean, he's on the road with her a lot. It's just his career is winding down regardless of Taylor Swift or not. I think it's fair to question at this point. But just like if Stephon Diggs was here, how much, how long is Stephon Diggs going to be an elite receiver? How much does Travis Kelce have left? I think that could be a pretty fair question to at least be somewhat concerned about if you're a Chiefs fan.
No, I think it's a fair question. I think, as you look at it, though, his brother Jason retiring this year, like they're at a different stage in their lives. And, Jason is married with a young family and can see that part of just saying like, hey, this is something that I need to do. I mean, and Travis Kelce, which is interesting too. I mean, he is catapult from superstar to NFL fans to all of a sudden global superstar, right?
Sure.
Because of kind of the recognition that he gets, based on his relationship. And I don't say that in like any sort of a negative way, just from a, that spotlight can feel pretty good for him right now. And I think for him to be able to turn it on, like I said, I'm not looking past Travis Kelce for 1 second in any matchup until he puts up like a 2 for 17 type of game against the Bills. And I don't see that happening yet.
Not in the playoffs. I don't see it happening. It's kind of funny, dude. It's a guy who is probably one of the top 2 at worst tight ends in the history of football, is probably around the world better known for being Taylor Swift's boyfriend than being an iconic, surefire first ballot Hall of Fame NFL tight end. I just always kind of feel like that's pretty wild, man. It really is. But all right, let's take a quick break. Come back. We're going to fly through some of these other teams, including right after the break, a team that the Bills will always intrigue me the most, of course. But besides the Bills, this team may intrigue me more than any other one in the AFC. right, I am back with my good friend Anthony Marino, and we are going through each team in the AFC and kind of examining the biggest question marks for each. And I said before the break, a little bit of a teaser. This team, besides the Bills, might intrigue me more than any other in this conference, and that's the Tennessee Titans. And I think the question mark to say is, are they a paper team right now? Because I'm going to tell you what, not a lot of teams dramatically feel like they improved their stock, so to speak, on paper in the offseason, but the Titans did. They go get Calvin Ridley Jr., who is a great receiver. They go get Tyler Boyd, who is a very good wide receiver slot guy. They already had DeAndre Hopkins, who still has plenty left. They get Tony Pollard to replace Travis Henry. Maybe that's a downgrade, but he does some things differently. They get L'Jarius Sneed. We just talked about him with the Chiefs, being one of the top 2 corners maybe in the NFL. And they go and get him. There's a team that, for the most part, they have some pretty good pieces to begin with. They look great on paper. Their quarterback, Levis, is very unproven. They got a first-time head coach in Brian Callahan, who you never know how a first-time head coach is going to fare. So this team is like a real enigma to me because they got a question mark at coach. They got a question mark at quarterback. But man, oh man, they got a nice roster right now, and they added a lot of top-end talent. So is Tennessee a paper team? That's my question mark with the Titans.
No, they're not a paper team. And, all those guys that you just listed are legitimate stars in the NFL. Sure. And that, that's not paper, right? I mean, those are guys that you can look at. No one is a flash in the pan. Yep. Nobody on that list. So, yeah, you've got the question at quarterback. That's fine. You got to look at that and see how he can play. Guy plays hard, right? I mean, he might have when I say a screw loose, I don't say it in a bad way, kind of along the same lines that like Josh Allen does, that, you might be, putting your body on the line in a way that, maybe someone doesn't want you to. And I do think the hire of Callahan was a good one, right? Comes from a coaching pedigree, right? With his sure. father. He's going to have kind of a lot of experience coming to the table with him and just sort of that input. It'll be really interesting to see how they do. But no, they're not a paper team in my opinion.
Yeah, they could easily be a team that I could see if things go right and if the quarterback plays well, they could be a playoff team this year. The Indianapolis Colts, I think it's a pretty simple question for me anyway. How good will Anthony Richardson be? A high pick last year, but we really didn't get to see much. He only played 4 games as a rookie, and in only 2 of those 4 games did he even throw more than 13 passes. They got some pieces. I don't think they're a great team. I don't think their defense is that good, but again, they got a skilled quarterback, but a guy who almost in a way is kind of still going to be a rookie in terms of experience playing in NFL games. So the question is, how good is their quarterback?
Yeah, and I'm not sold on him yet. And nobody really should be, right? You talk about 4 NFL games, limited experience, even at the college game, right? I'm thinking back to the draft talk of just, the discussion about just how few of games and snaps that he appeared in for the University of Florida. I say this though, I like Anthony Richardson. Like I like him as a player, as a leader, as a talent, as all of these things that come about. So me saying I'm not sure on him, that's with no sort of negativity at all. It is a young man that you look at and say, gosh, if this comes together, not that you compare everyone to Josh Allen. I mean, but this is a comparison that it's easy to make when you talk about all of the physical tools that are there and kind of the pedigree that he has, the teammate that he is. I think there's enough comparisons there. So this one's going to be interesting, and I'm really curious to see how he can play, if he can stay healthy, and what he can do, with a relatively successful Colts team, and can he get them to that next level?
Jacksonville, they're another team to me that is a pretty big enigma. And without question, their biggest question is Trevor Lawrence really more than just like mid? They've invested a lot in their offense through free agency, through trades, through the draft. 3 years in the league now, and over a first overall pick, and he came in with such an amazing pedigree, which not really necessarily is his fault, but I think the expectations might have been higher because everyone was saying, this is basically the next more modern version of Peyton Manning. And 3 years in, to me, he's been slightly better than average at best. 58 touchdowns, 39 interceptions. He's taken 94 sacks. He's been okay. Maybe even like we were talking about Justin Herbert earlier, kind of like in that same boat. I mean, his team's had a little more success, but I mean, they fell apart last year for sure. They had Gabe Davis, they lose Calvin Ridley. That's kind of a downgrade, but they did draft Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round. They picked up Mitch Morse, of course, too. He's a center. Maybe he helps them. You know, Mitch Morse is a great leader and a core player. I'm not, if I'm the Jacksonville Jaguars, I need to see a man. Plus, your boy just got a monster contract. So it ain't going nowhere. If I'm a Jacksonville fan, I need to see this guy get on that level. Maybe he's not quite Josh Mahomes and I don't even know who you want. Joey Burrow. You know, we'll put those three top. He's got to be a top 5 to 8 quarterback in this league for Jacksonville to really achieve anything. And I just don't think he's even been that close to being that at this point.
Yeah. And 3 years in, right, you'd like to see more. Plain and simple, right? There has been pieces around him that you can say, all right, expectations could certainly be higher for him and for the Jaguars with what they have. So, you mentioned it earlier with Herbert. I think if on a future episode, whether it's you and I or you and somebody else, if you go through and you rank like, hey, who would you rather have at quarterback? I think someone like Trevor Lawrence would probably end up a bit lower on that list than you would expect. And that's, it's not a knock, right? There's a lot of talented quarterbacks in the league right now, but just he hasn't shown that potential yet. Even like a Tua Tagovailoa has, right? Like someone that, you'll question and say, oh, should he, get an extension or whatnot? Like, I don't know. I might rather have Tua right now over Trevor Lawrence just based on the body of work that I've seen. I don't know. He's a tough one.
We're talking about, and here's what would concern me too if I'm Jacksonville. Not to say he can't still take a major step. I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility. So I'm clear about that. But he's had a pretty decent 3 years is a decent body of work. Whereas say Anthony Richardson, who we just talked about, he's had 4 NFL starts. So when you say how good he can be, I kind of feel like, the sky is high as can be potentially with Anthony Richardson. 3 years in, how much better is Trevor Lawrence going to get? Or is this pretty much what he is at this point? I'd be a little more concerned because I feel like the body of work kind of shows at this point what he is, as opposed to somebody, a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson, where you still don't know. Like they can play really, really good, way better than they have. I'm not sure that Trevor Lawrence will. So
no, I think that's fair. Like again, if he came out and put together a great season, you wouldn't be like surprised in any way, shape, or form. You just wish you'd seen more to this point.
Sure. And I want to point out too, we're going through these teams right now, and it seems quarterback heavy because at the end of the day, this is a quarterback driven league. And look, every team's got question marks beyond just the quarterback. There's plenty of other questions about Jacksonville too. Will their defense ever show up in a meaningful game? I'm just kind of trying to go through like the biggest ones. Houston's up next, and staying with the quarterback, I feel like the only real question mark this team has at this point is letdowns. They were a Cinderella team last year. They're not a Cinderella team anymore. They are probably a top 3, at worst 4 favorite in this conference. Can CJ Stroud avoid that dreaded sophomore slump? 23 touchdowns, not a lot. Only 5 picks though last year as a rookie. Over 4,100 yards. Looked poised. Looked like he's been in the league for 5 years at least. Does he take a step back? Because it seems besides injuries, CJ Stroud taking a step back might be the only thing that derails his team from being a true contender this year.
Yeah, and you can argue even to an extent. I mean, they overachieved last year, right? And that comes together, and it's like, listen, good on them. You've got D'Amico Ryans coming in as your first-time head coach, him doing a fantastic job. Now there's a little bit more tape out on them. Like, what are their tendencies? Now, teams will have an entire offseason to kind of plan for what type of quarterback CJ Stroud is, what type of, play caller he is, and kind of what's just taking place with the franchise. I don't say that like that I'm expecting them to take any sort of a step back. I'm certainly not ready to crown them yet, but listen, are they the favorite to win the AFC South? Absolutely. Is it a wide open AFC that, you could see anyone making it to the Super Bowl? Absolutely. And, even when you talk about the AFC South, right? If any of these four teams we just mentioned won the division, I wouldn't be surprised, right? You talk about the talent they have in Tennessee,
Sure.
Jacksonville, if things start to click, obviously with Indianapolis, the way that they've played, yeah, so Houston should be the favorite, but that AFC South used to be, a bit of a punchline. Not anymore, man. There are no Sundays off when it comes to those teams.
It's because they have the luxury of having a guy just going into year two in that rookie contract that afforded them an opportunity to, be in good cap shape and have a really aggressive offseason. They had Stephon Diggs. They had Donnell Hunter on the defensive side, who's a great defensive end. Yeah, a lot of skill, it's a very stacked team. But we'll see if the quarterback is as good in year two or better than he was as a rookie. All right, Cincinnati. Look, this one to me is one of the easiest. Can Joe Burrow stay healthy? That's what it's all about if you're a Cincinnati fan. We sleep on the Bengals a lot during offseason discussions. You talk Bills, of course, because we're a Buffalo-based podcast. You're always talking Chiefs because they're the champs. Houston's a fun team on the come-up. Tennessee's got a lot of paper talent. Cincinnati Bengals are right there. And the Baltimore Ravens were the top seed in the AFC last year. But Joe Burrow's got to stay healthy. He's had a major injury two times in his 4-year career. And the 2 times he's had a full healthy season, they've made the Super Bowl and they've made the AFC Championship game. So that just shows you when he's out there, they're one of the best teams in the league. And if we're being fair, as much as it hurts to lose to the Chiefs, it seems all the time in the playoffs, the Bills have had a lot of success against the Chiefs and they've played them really good for the most part every time they played them. The Bengals, though, the last 2.5 times they've seen the Bengals have kind of dominated the game. Scores aside, the Bengals have pretty much dominated the Bills. So I think the biggest question with the Bengals is simple. Can Joe Burrow play a full season and stay healthy?
Yeah, and I mean, right, that goes without being said. I actually think there's a bigger question than that, not to kind of go off script here, but they lose Joe Mixon, who, say what you want about him as a player, and you can look at statistics, has been a central piece to that offense and to that success, right? And might not have the most, glamorous statistics that are out there, but here's a guy that was a big part of their successful teams that they had. Well, Mixon is now gone, right? So he is out of the mix in Cincinnati, so now you're looking at something different when it comes to your running game, and you can bring in a Zach Moss and do some different things, and that's fine. But, sometimes with that, I think that's something that you can't look past. And I'd say the same thing about Tyler Boyd, right? Not the flashiest receiver on their squad. You're always going to talk about Chase and Higgins first, and rightfully so, based on their ability and their statistics. But Tyler Boyd has been someone that has served such a consistent role for Joe Burrow as a part of that team. Again, I don't say any of this to be like, these are 2 guys that you should be thinking, oh, the sky is falling in Cincinnati. Not at all. But I think those are 2 under the radar departures that I don't think are being talked about enough. So sorry for taking a left turn there, but
no. That's what we're talking. It's about question marks, man. That's what we're being negative to some extent on 14 teams today because we're talking about question marks with these teams. Pittsburgh, speaking of, look, they got multiple question marks. They are a borderline contender. They're a team that's always in the mix. Mike Tomlins just doesn't put out losing teams. He just doesn't do it. Is Russell Wilson cooked at this point? I thought he was awful last year with Denver, with the exception of the Bills game on Thursday night. Anyway, in Buffalo, he wasn't really awful for whatever reason that game. But you got a potentially cooked Russell Wilson. You got a talented but underachieving to this point Justin Fields in the mix as well. Kind of might have maybe this is even the bigger question. Are we going to see a Rob Johnson versus Doug Flutie type situation in Pittsburgh? And I'm not necessarily talking about skill sets and age. I'm talking about division. The coach, the staff, the fans, maybe even his teammates might be really divided on who they think should be out there. The old crafty veteran who might have a little something left for Russell Wilson, or the young, talented Justin Fields, who is really talented, but just doesn't get it done to this point, the vision in the organization might be an issue for this team. Like, who should be the starter?
Yeah, and it's, listen, credit to Mike Tomlin, never had a losing record, right?
That's
So
crazy.
It's like, who am I to question what he is doing? But I did find it interesting that they basically named Russell Wilson the number one quarterback, and I don't know if they officially named him the starter, but they went out of their way to kind of anoint him. And, listen, Justin Fields, I personally thought there would be a greater market for him as a quarterback. I don't watch enough of the Chicago Bears, right? So I don't want to sound like a box score scout here, but there would be enough things that you would say of like, listen, this guy can make plays. It might be, Lamar Jackson light type of thing. Like, I'm not putting him in that same stratosphere, but to be like, this is a guy that can do some things that if it were me, I would at least want to see the competition, right? Don't put yourself into, kind of pigeonhole yourself there, because you might not have the playmakers that you used to have in the past, right? I mean, hey, you can only do so much with Freiermuth and Pickens, and like Najee Harris, you didn't pick up his fifth-year option. Like, so to have someone like Justin Fields that can make some plays with his legs himself might be something that you kind of need here to keep that competitive spirit. But, we've seen, again, the Steelers get to the playoffs with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett as a quarterback, and Mitch Trubisky starting a season for them. So, it might just be like, listen, Russell Wilson coming in and just being quote unquote a game manager might be okay with them. But at least from an offseason storyline, like to see a competition there in Pittsburgh would at least have been something fun to follow.
For sure. And I know what they're saying now. I still feel like the leash will be short, I feel like, with Russell Wilson. And if he's not playing well, I think you'll see Justin Fields rather quickly. Cleveland Browns. Will we see the Houston Texans version, on the field version, not off it, of Deshaun Watson? Because Deshaun Watson, look, it was not that long ago where you don't have a top 5 quarterback in the NFL conversation and not include Deshaun Watson. And now you're hard pressed to put him maybe in the top half of the league. Is the talent there still? Has everything that's happened off the field, affected how he plays on the field? Because besides that, Cleveland's another one of those teams, man. They're good. They're good. If their quarterback play is good, they're good. They picked up Jerry Jeudy. They already had Amari Cooper. David Njoku is one of the best tight ends in the league. Nick Chubb, of course, come back from major injury. A great running back, and we all know Cleveland can play some defense. So they had a lot of talent. But what Deshaun Watson are you going to get? Because the one you've seen over the last year and a half or whatever has just been pretty awful.
I'm not one to go out on a limb too much here, but in this situation I will, and that I think that he's done. Yeah. And I say that I think that he's done. The time away from the game, all of the just call it everything that took place off the field.
Yeah.
And then you get traded and you get this contract that's like guaranteed $240 million or whatever it is, right? Wow. I mean, stupid money for him. And I don't say this is like what he's doing, but it could just be like, think of like the Jamarcus Russell contract, right? Like, hey, you're this rookie, you get the number 1 overall pick, you get this monster wad of cash guaranteed to you. Like, all right, you won, you didn't just win the lottery, like you won the Mega Millions, right? Mm-hmm. Like I just don't see anything that is taking place with him, with the Browns, to say, here's a reason to be optimistic with what he's bringing to the franchise. I just don't see it. And I mean, heck, last year, Joe Flacco looked great for him. I mean, I just think he's done. And that's not even any of the, like, taking into account any of the off-field stuff, which you know how I feel about that. Yeah. But I just think he's
could be. And that kind of shows you that there's a good team. Nothing against Joe Flacco, but they had a lot of success with Joe Flacco. Look, Deshaun Watson might ultimately go down as the worst trade and the worst contract ever given to a player in the history of the NFL. No question about it. But If he could somehow get some of it back, and you're wrong, I don't think you're wrong, but if you are, then Cleveland's definitely going to be a force this year in the league. Baltimore Ravens, again, staying with the quarterbacks here. Can Lamar Jackson play well and win when it matters? This is a guy who's won not one, but 2 NFL MVPs already in his career. Say what you will last year, that whether he was deserving or not, or just there wasn't no standout, and it was one of the least impressive MVP campaigns you'll ever see, still won MVP, and he's done it twice. But in the playoffs, dude's 2-4 in the playoffs, 6 touchdowns in 6 games, 6 interceptions in 6 games. He was lousy last year in the AFC Championship game against Kansas City. He was lousy in 2021 when Baltimore came to Buffalo and lost. I think it was 14-3 that game. I think at this point of his career, just like kind of like with Trevor Lawrence, you say this is who he is. Maybe that's who Lamar is. You know, he plays really good in the regular season, but the biggest moments, the playoffs, you have seen far from the best of Lamar Jackson when the stakes are the biggest.
Yeah, and it's a fair criticism, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, again, you can look at it and just like, you know, his entire body of work for him, like, good on Lamar Jackson. Everything that he's done, he's bet on himself, late first-round draft pick, becoming one of the best players in football, but has not been able to show that yet. And I think the interesting thing with them too is, you know, this is a team that because they signed Derrick Henry, all of a sudden is being lauded as this Super Bowl favorite. And no one's taking into account everything else that they've lost. They've taken hits on the offensive line. Like, hey, an aging running back that, like, I mean, trust me, everyone knows I'm a huge fan of Derrick Henry and wanted the Bills to go after him multiple times and put him in that backfield and see what he can do. A nice addition to the team, don't get me wrong. But at this stage in his career, I don't know that he's giving you more than what, heck, Gus Edwards was last year, as one of the most reliable red zone backs in football. So for Lamar Jackson, I almost feel like as we have this conversation, the deck is stacked against him a little bit because the roster around him is worse than it was the year before. So sure. If you're talking about similar to what we said with the Chiefs, right? Like, hey, you've got the pieces around you that Patrick Mahomes can step up in the right places. I don't think the Ravens roster is where it needs to be right now, that it's worse than the roster they had during the 2023 season, which I think could make things more difficult for him this year.
The Ravens kind of remind me a little bit of the Ryan Tannehill Tennessee Titans during that run, where the Titans seemed to be really good in the regular season, and then they just kind of fold down the stretch and into the playoffs. Of course, I'm not saying Lamar Jackson is Ryan Tannehill. Lamar Jackson is a great quarterback, an elite quarterback, one of the best in the league, but you can't take you can't take away the fact that he just has not played well statistically or just with the naked eye in the playoffs when it matters. And until he does, they're not going to go anywhere. All right, so let's get into the AFC East here as we wind down. The Patriots. A lot of questions with the Patriots, of course. They're probably they are the least talented team in the division. I would say if I'm a New England fan, I'm optimistic because they went out and they drafted a quarterback and pair of talented wide receivers. A lot of Bills fans liked a lot during this draft process, but their question mark might be, are they relying too much right now on youth? You know, Drake May, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, all added during this draft. Again, not overall, at least to me, not that much of a challenging roster. You could also say, how is first-year head coach Jared Mayo going to, as big shoes to fill, taking over for Bill Belichick, even if the Patriots haven't been good over the last couple years. So I don't know what way you want to frame their biggest question mark. Bottom line is this. There's plenty of questions with the New England Patriots.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I like what they've done so far, right? Mm-hmm. And you say, like, hey, relying on the youth, but in some ways, like, listen, we're hitting a reset. Like, sure. You didn't really hit the reset right after Tom Brady left. And you kind of, you go with Mac Jones, but the rest of your roster with what you've done. Like, in this position, like, see what you've got in the young guys. With Mayo, I think the interesting thing is, like, we have not seen someone come from the Bill Belichick coaching tree and have success yet, right? We've seen some guys fizzle out pretty, miserably when you talk about sure. like a Josh McDaniels. You talk about Joe Judge, Matt Patricia, Bill O'Brien to an extent, right, has had success, but what that part looks like. So now for Gerard Mayo, like, okay, can you be the guy to kind of buck that trend and not even say have success this year, but just give Patriots fans a reason to have some optimism? Because we know, like, and every fan base can get pretty down when things aren't going well. I mean, Patriots fans, it's like, they've had it pretty good for a long period of time. So when the wheels start to fall off, it is like the sky is falling. But is this a coach that can come in now, breathe some kind of fresh air into the franchise? I tend to think that he can, but it's going to be it'll be an interesting season to see, what they look like and how quickly will they start Drake May at quarterback, or do they really be patient with him and let him learn from the sidelines?
Yeah, and look, so we're clear too to everybody out there watching and listening. This isn't really a projection show. This isn't what I think about a team for 2024 show. We're talking about question marks. If I'm a New England Patriots fan, I think I got what I wanted. I want to reset, like to your point. I got me a new coach, got me a new quarterback, whether he starts week 1, week 10, or maybe not even so much at all his rookie year. Got a pair of receivers that I really like a lot. So there's a lot to be excited about, not necessarily for this season, but certainly for the future when it comes to the Patriots. All right, let's move on to the Jets here. Look, they're a good football team. Their defense has been good for years, and they remain good. Plenty of weapons on offense. Garrett Wilson's a great receiver. A lot of weapons, man. And they've done a lot of work on the offensive line this season. At the end of the day, with the Jets, it's like, can you really trust Aaron Rodgers? That's what it comes down to, because this seems to be a team that, if anything happens to Aaron Rodgers, well, you could say that about the Bills or most teams around the league, I suppose. You're in a lot of trouble. But can you trust a guy who's, 40 years old, a guy who's had a major Achilles injury, a guy that at least watching limited videos on social media, OTAs at camp, don't look great. Like that with that foot, if you're paying attention to that. I got major concerns if I'm a Jets fan. Can I trust Aaron Rodgers to stay healthy? Or question B, how good could Tyrod Taylor be if given the opportunity to be a starter on the team? I believe he's the backup. But can you trust Aaron Rodgers?
It's like the Jets are so annoying because, and I say that in a positive way to, in respect to them, because you see the Bills lose a game to them each of the last 2 seasons with Zach Wilson as a starting quarterback. And that part is like, gosh, man, that shouldn't be able to happen. But credit to Robert Saleh as a head coach and what they've able to do with their defense. And yeah, they've got some star power on the team. The difference this year compared to last year, it's, you just said, Tyrod Taylor as the backup, that if things don't work out with Aaron Rodgers, if he does suffer another injury, I do think you have a quarterback that's clearly an upgrade to Zach Wilson. And we've seen the team be competitive, at least, with Zach Wilson beforehand. But, I mean, the Aaron Rodgers piece, I mean, as annoying as it can be with him and just all of the additional storylines that follow him around, does he have something left in the tank? Almost to the point, like, and again, he doesn't want to be compared to Brett Favre, but he's doing enough to compare himself to Brett Favre, like, almost out of spite, where Favre like willed his way to that phenomenal season with the Minnesota Vikings. Like, does Rodgers have one more spite-filled season in the tank to just be like, I'm just going to shut everyone up, and whatever happens after this is fine, but I'm not dead yet.
If I ever told you that I hate Aaron Rodgers, I think I might have said it once or twice along the way. I hate Aaron Rodgers. I hate Aaron Rodgers. Look, unbiased, objective, I'm not even just saying this as a Bills fan. I think he's shot. I do. I think he's done. I would not be surprised to see Taylor play at some point in the season, and it might be sooner, whether that's injury, whether the dude just doesn't have it anymore. And he's a weirdo at this point. It wouldn't shock me if he does play reasonably well. You mentioned the Brett Favre spike season. I could actually see that now that you bring that up. I could also see this dude having a minor injury and pretty much just walking away from the team, man. And just for all intents and purposes, just quitting on them. Nothing he does would surprise me because that's the kind of person that I think he is. Anyway, but look, if he's there and around, if he's playing even average, the Jets are certainly going to be a force. Second last team here, Miami. And look, is Tua money against good competition? This seems like a guy who just destroys the Denver Broncos of the world, a guy who throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in October, and then he just tightens up and does not play well down the stretch against good competition. I look at Miami's schedule. We've talked about this before. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember the opponents exactly. But I know that last 4 to 6 weeks, they got a really tough schedule. So if they're in a dogfight, what kind of Tua are you going to see? He's got all the leverage with the team right now, I feel like, especially after Trevor Lawrence got paid. You said he might be better than Trevor. I actually agree with that take. Miami's got a tough decision because they're going to give an awful lot of money to a quarterback that I personally don't think is that good, because I don't think he plays that good against better competition, and especially late in the season. So is Tua money when it matters against good competition? That's the biggest question mark of a handful when it comes to the Miami Dolphins. For me.
Kind of. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's a hard one to answer because, and I've said to you before, I do like the guy. I think for what he is, what he's been through and some of the narratives, and, you know, and listen, for me to say anything nice about any member of the Miami Dolphins takes a lot.
Kills you.
I mean, they have to pay him, right? Like, I mean, how do you not, for what they have been able to do? And again, going back to the, you know, and I'm not comparing him to Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, it's not, but again, like, okay, you're in the right system. You're getting the ball to your playmakers. These guys are making plays. You're a successful team. You are struggling down the stretch, right, against those better teams. But like, are you going to let him walk in free agency and start over and like go to the draft and just think that you can get anybody here? Like, I don't know. Like, that's a real tough one. And again, he's not this, you know, physical specimen at quarterback that you can look at. It is a real interesting storyline, because to me, it's just like, what are you waiting for? Every day that you wait, the price goes up for what you have to pay him. But the fact that they haven't done it yet, the whole where they used to kind of be like sniffing around the Tom Brady thing in the past, right? And like, now granted, Tua wasn't the quarterback then that he is today under Mike McDaniel. So there's that piece to it as well. But it's just like, the longer that you guys wait, it's just going to cost you more and more to re-sign him. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I get it. It is tough. If I'm a Miami fan, I mean, I'll give him this year, but if I'm a Miami fan, I almost would rather have a shitty quarterback where you know you want to go in another direction. He's like good enough that it's going to be hard to improve on him, but he's not good enough to be Josh Allen or Burrow or Mahomes. I don't trust him to go in December, January and throw for 390 yards and 3 touchdowns and win a game where my defense is not playing well. Kind of like in a predicament. And by the way, if they're going to pay Tua, you better pay Tyreek Hill too then. They've already paid Waddle, because I don't think Tua's anywhere near the quarterback without having that dangerous Tyreek Hill on the field as well. So you pay one, you better pay Tyreek Hill as well. And look, with Miami, that's not the only question mark. You know, if you want to plant your flag on the ground and say Tua is an asset and not a potential problem, okay, I would point to the edge rushers and both of them coming off major injuries. As a Bills fan, we've seen it over the last couple of years. It takes time to get back, and maybe not necessarily on the field, but to be your old self. And to have Phillips and Bradley Chubb both coming off major injuries, losing Christian Wilkins, that defensive line is taking a pretty damn big hit this offseason between injuries and the free agent loss. I love me some Jordan Poyer. Was not, 2019 to 2022 Jordan Poyer that we saw last year. Is even a year older, new team, new system. If he's out there starting, what does he have left at this point? There's lots of questions with Miami. They're a good team. They're a good team, and they're going to be in the mix, in the conversation to be the favorites in this division. I understand that, but they got a lot of question marks too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and listen, the question marks that they have, we can talk about the question marks that every team has out there. So I'm kind of hedging here a little bit, right? It's like, I'm not you see some of our friends online, like they'll go at it with Dolphins fans and this and that. Like, Now I'm gonna be respectful until there's a reason
Sure.
not to. And it's
Sure.
like for right now, I just look at them and say, like, they're a really talented team. Like, hey, you talked about Christian Wilkins leaving before. I mean, that's a huge void that right left on their defensive line. And that part is, not to be looked past. But listen, when you can score the way they can and put up as many passing yards as they can and have as successful a rushing game as they have, like, all right, like let's see what can happen. And hopefully the Bills just continue to have the upper hand as it comes to those matchups.
I feel like if you were a head coach of a football team or a head coach of a basketball team, one of your biggest coaching principles and philosophies would be to your message to your team would be, don't give the opponent message board material. I'm the opposite. I'm going to fill up that bulletin board with all kinds of shit talking. You're definitely not gonna get that from head coach Anthony Marino. All right, last team saved the most important, I suppose, for last, and we're only going to glance on this because we still got a couple weeks, and we will dive into some of the question marks before and maybe even early on in the camp. But for now, I would say the biggest question mark with the Bills is simply, did they lose too many core players in one off season? Mitch Morse, Stephon Diggs, Jordan Poyer, certainly looks like Micah Hyde, Trey White. Those are core players. Those are leadership guys. Gabe Davis. Let's throw Gabe Davis in there too. He's not nothing. He matters. We'll throw him in there as well. Veterans, guys they've won with, guys that they're familiar with in the locker room. Good players in many cases, not the players that they were a couple years ago. And I'm not suggesting, and again, we'll deep dive into them more, obviously, on this show coming up. Other guys could step up and take that role. But I think maybe as an outsider, even as a Bills fan, a Buffalo person, I think it's a fair question. Like, the biggest thing is, did they lose too much in one off season?
I think it's a fair question. My answer is no. They did not lose too much. And it goes to it. Now, as we've said many times, right, of these 16 teams, there's one that I listen to and read about and think, every single day, and that's the Buffalo Bills. And these other teams I do not. So, but when, someone like, Joe Marino, who we know and trust, talks about, hey, losing the safeties, like they really weren't the safeties that they used to be, right?
Right.
And someone that studies the film and knows a heck of a lot more about what they're talking about, certainly than I do, then I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. And, maybe at defensive end, Leonard Floyd, who had a great first half of the season, but kind of disappeared down the stretch, right?
Yes.
If I can say, like, still guys have to step up. Don't get me wrong. But the piece that gives me the most confidence with it is Bobby Babbage. And that is the part where it's like everywhere that he has gone with this team before, he has taken guys that there have been question marks around and turn them into incredibly high performers. And, maybe there's some luck with that. Maybe it's just guys maturing and growing into it. But it seems like a little bit too much of just a coincidence to say that Bobby Babbage is just, in the right place at the right time. So when it comes to this, and we don't know who will be playing, calling the plays just yet, this and that, it's fine. But his players rave about him and they love him. And he brings a different kind of energy, certainly than Leslie Frazier did, definitely than Sean McDermott does. And to be that leader of the defense and putting that together, a little bit of bravado, a little bit of swagger, I think the time is right to have that. So that part to me, because when you talk about most of these departures, right, minus Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis, we're talking about the defensive side of the ball, right? You're talking about Leonard Floyd, Trey White, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, and I get that. I completely get that. So this is the part where it just gives me more optimism, and to be talking about a defensive coordinator giving me that sort of optimism, like, it's a little different, right? Usually it's some draft pick or it's a free agent signing. Not the case with this. So, for me to have that confidence right now and say they haven't lost too much, Bobby Babbage is the main reason why.
Very fair. And, I would add too, DaQuan Jones being re-signed, I thought was a big deal. How he plays on the field and also presence in the locker room. And he's a veteran, a longtime veteran, a leader on this team. So I think that was a big signing. I'll add one more thing real quick here that we're bouncing, because I want to kind of more deep dive into some of these other potential question marks and issues in an episode that we'll do sometime over the next week or two. I would say another fair question, if you're going to ask about the Buffalo Bills, is if you're going to beat Pat Mahomes, if you're going to beat Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson or Marcus Stroud in the playoffs, you got to get to the quarterback. That has to happen. What Von Miller is left? What Von Miller are we going to see? And on the other side, is Greg Rizzo going to have that breakout season? Is he going to take that next step? He's been a 5 to 8 sack guy in the league so far this year. He's been a good, at times very good defensive end, but he hasn't taken that leap. Is this the year that he's going to do it? So combine him and Von Miller, I think the edge guys are a question mark, to be fair, at this point.
Oh, that's totally fair. And I think, honestly, the most important edge player is AJ Epinesa. Because to me, here's a guy that if you look at what he has done statistically in limited number of snaps, it feels like he's just being held back by the lack of playing time. And again, well documented the body transformation he's gone through, being drafted in 2020 during COVID and all these types of pieces. But when you talk about him as a player and what he does on 30 to 35% of the snaps, now you get him somewhere to like 60, 65% of the snaps. I don't need to see Shaq Lawson out there on the field, right? I need to see more of an AJ Epinesa type.
Fair.
That's what I'm looking for. And I think he is really the wild card that could become the most valuable edge rusher at a pretty favorable price that they got him for in free agency.
All right. I agree with you. And that's going to do it for this show. Like I said, sometime soon, I kind of want to spend an episode, today was about talking about the conference. I want to lock in more on the Bills, and we'll kind of go over some major, maybe not even major, but major to moderate questions that this team may have going into camp. And maybe we'll deep dive and spend a little more time talking about Buffalo specifically. But make sure you're following Anthony on Twitter at Anth Marino. Thanks, buddy. It's always fun having you back, man. I missed you last week.
I missed you too. It's always good to catch up, man.